All right, so let me take you over to the easel. Now, what I'd like you to do is, if it's possible, I'd like you to try to work upright like I am. We were talking a little bit about this last week. If you can't, just do your best. Like, just try to get your sketch pad leaning up against something as upright as possible. The technique that I mentioned before is if you sat in a chair and then put a chair facing you and lean the sketchbook up against the back of that chair. That way you could draw with it a little bit more upright. You'll find that it's just easier to kind of do some of the things that we're going to do. For this, we're going to pretend like this is the image from my video. So this is going to be my subject, and I'm going to take you through the steps that I use to draw a still life. I'm using, like I said, the Vine charcoal. So this is the Vine charcoal. You could use something like just soft graphite, but I'll show you. You'll see instantly why I'm using this. And I'm doing it on newsprint. So Vine charcoal on newsprint is one of those matches made in heaven. They go well together. And you can draw, you can make very light lines, and you can make very dark lines, and you can wipe it away with your fingers. So it's good for really fast, quick work. And this kind of thing that we're doing, where we're kind of just practicing some of these techniques, right? So the first thing that I do is I look at my still life. And again, you want to make sure that you're looking down and see the tops of all your objects. And you notice that I set my paper up horizontally. And that's because I looked at my still life and I just observed that it felt like it was wider than tall. But then I'm going to double check that. So I could use my L frames and I could wrap them around like I was going to take a picture of it. And I could look at that shape and I could see that it's not quite a square. It's wider than it is tall, but not by a lot. The other way I could do that is I could use a dowel or a paintbrush, and I could just look at the widest points of the still life and the tallest, compare it to the tallest points. And then you can see that the widest points are wider than the tallest points. So when I'm about to do this drawing, I know that it needs to be this way. It's going to fit better horizontally. So I turn my board that way. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a kind of a border. And this is going to be just kind of a window that represents the shape I think that group of objects is. So I'm going to rough that out very lightly like this. So I'm going to make that same shape I just saw through my window. So slightly wider than it is tall. And I'm just doing that by eye. I'm not measuring it or anything, but I'm going to just estimate. And we're going to do a lot of estimating. We talked a lot about measuring, but we're going to estimate a lot too. Kind of a nice balance of both. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to count how many objects I have. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 three-dimensional objects. I've got some paper, and I've got, oh, you can't see it. Didn't show up in the photo, but there's a little piece of paper back here. And so I'm going to what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a space for each one of those objects. And I'm just going to estimate right now. So I'm going to start with the box that's kind of in the middle, just kind of rough out a place for that. I'm not going to draw any angles. I'm not going to draw any perspective or anything like that. And then I'm going to rough out some of the other shapes. There's the black box, and then the roll of tape is going to be kind of over here. And then there's a planter kind of thing, and it's right there. And then there's a cocktail shaker, and that is all the way on the left side. And it comes up roughly there, and I'm just going to make a window for that. And then there's this, I can barely see it, but there's a little jar there, or a glass, or a bottle. So I'm going to put that in. Okay. And those are my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's another object, there's a cork there. So that's my 7th thing. I'm just going to put that in there somewhere. Okay, so This is a really important stage of the drawing, because what I'm going to do is I've just estimated where things are going to go, and I've estimated about how big they are. Okay. This is a good point to maybe just double check everything. Maybe just look at it and analyze or compare reality to your drawing and see if anything needs to change, get bigger, get smaller, move to the left, move to the right, anything like that. One of the things that's really helpful at this stage is to find the center. So I'm going to find the center of my drawing. I've decided that this is the right side and this is the left side. So the center would be okay, so roughly there. So I'm going to draw a light line that divides my drawing into two equal halves. So right and left. And then I'm going to go up here to my actual setup, and I'm going to look at from the right side, which is the edge of this tape, and I'm going to find what is roughly the center of the still life. So I'm going to just kind of, again, just roughly. And what I'm finding is that the right side of this bottle, it falls right on the midpoint of this drawing. So that tells me, see where I put this? It can't go there. The bottle has to exist in this space here. So that's an important discovery. Now let's look at some other things. Maybe just a quick measure. There's the height of the cocktail shaker, and it's a little shorter than the bottle. So let's see what I've done here. There's the space I made for the cocktail shaker. There's the bottle. So that cocktail shaker is too tall. So I might make that a little smaller. Make the space for it a little smaller. Okay. And I could do that with a couple of other things. I could look at that little box there and say, okay, so that should be about half the height of the shaker. So here's the shaker. Yeah, I mean, what I have there is pretty good. Okay, so I've got that kind of mapped out. This should be, looking at that, the middle, this should probably move over a little bit. So the reason it's important to do it now is because once I put all the angles in there and the ellipses, you're not going to want to do this because it'll be so complicated. You'll say, oh, I can't move that, right? But these are just blobs. I can move blobs. I'm just going to be moving these blobs around until I get them as close to being where they should be as possible. All right, so I've made some adjustments, and after every stage of this, you make adjustments. And so you saw me doing that, making a few adjustments. Wipe out a line you don't want if you need to. But I would try to keep as many, don't be afraid to leave all your marks. This is not a cleanup drawing. I want to see the process of this. So if you're working with fine charcoal and you wipe out a line, that's fine, but that's not the goal. The goal isn't to make this thing like the plant drawing we did a few weeks ago. Okay, this is going to be rough. Okay. Okay, so we've checked the midpoint. We've done a quick check of some of the proportions, and we've made adjustments. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the fact that there are multiple planes. So it's not just a blob. There are going to be different planes to this. So here's this box, and I should be able to see the top of the box. This is what we did a couple of weeks ago when we were drawing those boxes. And that. Now I'm going to tell you something that it's really important. It's not obvious, but when I make a mark, I always look to see where that mark is relative to other things. So I went to draw the midline of that box, and I noticed that it's kind of near the center of the bottle. So as I figured out where to put it, I looked at the shape I drew up here, and I made sure that it fell in that area, that general area. Okay, no angles yet, right? So no angles. I'm just going to draw. I know this looks like an angle, but it's not a perspective angle. I'm just drawing the basic shape of this. And then over here, I've got the top of this box, and then that, and then I've got the tape, the top of the tape and the front of the tape. And this guy, I see a lot of the top, a little of the right side, and a lot of the left side. And there's this bottle. and I'm just gonna, and see, I'm being pretty messy. Okay, so just a little bit more specific, but no angles yet, no perspective, nothing like that. Now what I want to do is I'm going to draw the center lines for everything that is a cylinder. So I'm going to draw a vertical line through the cocktail shaker, through that jar, through the tape. And these are things, and there's also one for cork, right? So there's the cork right there. So those are things that I can actually measure against. So I could look at the center of the jar and the center of the cocktail shaker, and then see that should be smaller, a smaller distance than between the tape and the jar. So in fact, it should take me to about there. So let me see what that ended up looking like. So that distance, and that should take me to about there. So that tells me that maybe I'm just need to pull this in a little bit. Maybe bring this over a tiny bit. All right, now the other thing that I'm doing at this stage while it's still rough is I'm looking at where I put gaps between things. So I know there's a gap between that and that. There isn't a gap here, it's almost lines up. So as I sort of sketch this out, I make sure that these two things touch each other like that. This is the tape, and then the box has to come in a little bit from there, and so on. Okay, I'm just about ready for some angles and ellipses. So let's start thinking about them. And I'm going to treat this like shapes. I'm not going to worry about perspective. I'm going to do a couple of things here. I might do the stuff we did a couple of weeks ago where I used the dowel to help me find the angles. But again, I'm going to estimate things. I'm going to start with this white box. And I'm just going to draw a few lines for it. And I'm going to show you how some of the things we did way back at the beginning are going to come into play here. So do you guys remember when we drew the second night, we drew the Pierrot drawing? Do you remember that? Where there was a big painting of a bunch of people who looked like soldiers, and there were flags and horses and all that kind of stuff. And we just kind of followed the contours around, and when it crashed into something else, we went along there. So I want you to use that skill here. And so as I sort of think about where this box is, I come down, I go that way, I turn a corner, I go that way, and then I run into this planter, this other box. So now I'm going to just kind of figure out how that overlaps that. Maybe like that. And then this other part comes out where? Maybe a bit like that, and then it goes up like that. So again, I'm not going to draw this box and then draw this box and then draw that. I'm going to draw little bits and pieces of everything at this stage. And just kind of, again, I'm just estimating where things are. Before I go in, I will eventually get to a point where I'm going to say, let me seriously draw that box. But right now, I'm just kind of mapping out where things are likely to go. This is all very, but I like to say it's we're still negotiating. Everything's negotiable. Again, I'm using some of my measuring skills to do that. Then we've got this corner, and then this comes down. So I'm going to look at this negative space here. And where is that? Okay, so now I'm going to rough in a couple of ellipses. Using my center line as my guide. I'm not doing the whole thing I did last week. I'm simplifying it, but I'm going to go back and do that at some point, but not yet. All right, let's jump around a bit. So that's fine. That helps me place that. And the reason I'm not drawing an entire thing at once is because if I have to move something, I don't want to move everything. I just want a little bit of it. And let's find this piece of paper here. So there's this little piece of paper comes over. And I'm looking at this shape here. And then this shape's going to come down and hit there. That's pretty close. Maybe it's a little lower, like that. And then this is the corner, and it's somewhere here, and then it goes back. It's going to emerge there. And then it runs into the tape. So I'm using, everything's kind of happening, and I'm just looking at where, when I do that, how does that line up? This is going to be an ellipse with another ellipse on top of it. And we're back to this box. And then I know where this is. And there's another angle. And there's an angle here. And then these are very similar. Now, a couple of things. So you notice that I'm using like X-ray vision. I will draw this line. I know that it's hidden. And some of these lines get hidden because they're behind other things. But I'm going to draw as though everything were made out of like smoky glass. I'm going to draw through things. And that's going to help me figure out how things are placed. So drawing the bottom of this, for instance, it helps me place it on top of that box. I'm looking at this space here, this shape. That should line up with that. Now, where's the top of that? It's a little bit above these things. All right, so what else do I have? I have this little cork over here. The cork is just a little cylinder. And okay, so I've kind of roughed out where things are going to go, and they're still loose. And I haven't done the really careful ellipses or anything like that. Just kind of a little bit messy. Just kind of roughed everything in because I want to still leave room for some revisions. Okay, so I get to that stage. I want to make sure I'm also checking these spaces, these negative spaces. So I'm going to go through a step where I maybe just concentrate on these spaces right here. Okay. And I look at that, and I look at that. And I try to judge if that looks accurate to me. I feel like maybe this thing could just be a little wider. So I'm moving the center line slightly to that. Okay, so here's the next step. This is an important one. At this stage, what I would do is I would step back and I would just compare. I would just look by eye, look back and forth, and see if anything is jumping out at me as being just way off base, you know? So I noticed a couple of things. One is I'm not happy with the overall proportion of this. I think it should be a little narrower, which means I can sort of bring this up a little bit. So I'm making a pretty good bunch of revisions. But if you don't trust your instincts, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take a ruler and you're going to mark the high and low points of all your objects. So I'm going to take the top of that cocktail shaker and I'm going to draw a line across very lightly. Do that at the bottom. keep it very horizontal. Don't let it tip. Do that. I'm going to do that here, like the corner of that box. I'm going to draw a horizontal line. I'm going to do that at the height or the corner of this box, this black box. All right, I'm going to do it at the back edge of that tape. And I've already done it at the front edge. Maybe the bottom of the bottle. So anything like a really important landmark or a moment in the drawing, go ahead and do that. Then also extend all of your verticals. So here's the left side of the tape. Here's the right side. Here's the left side of the cork. Here's the right side. Here's the right side of the bottle. Left side. Box. So basically what you're doing is you're kind of making a grid. And this is something you do when you're drawing. When you get really good at drawing, you're doing this all the time. You're comparing across and up and down. But until you get really like that becomes second nature, doing this stage is going to help you just look at relationships. So now one of the things I notice is that the top of this cocktail shaker and the top of that cork are almost on the same line, right? So let's check it against reality. And you'll notice that that's pretty good, right? That's accurate. I noticed that the bottom of this cocktail shaker and the front corner of this are on the same line, and the bottom of the tape, they all line up in my drawing. Do they in real life? Ooh, not so much, right? So the bottom of the tape is too high in my drawing, or this is too low. What do you think it is? So let's, if you see that there's something wrong, go back and look at other relationships and see if there's something simple that you missed. I would say that in this case, I'm pretty happy with a lot of this. Let me see. I think that the cocktail shaker's too low because I remember I raised this. So maybe I made that too low. Maybe if I could raise that a little bit and I could have to play with the proportions of it. But that's going to change that. This could, remember I had to move this up because I moved that. So I moved a couple of things up. So now I'm going to make adjustments. Okay, so that changed that, that changed that. And this is now here. Okay. All right, so now that this is up higher, it should be up here. So I move things to suit my new idea. And then this guy can stay the same. And I might even make him a little taller because I think I made him too short anyway. All right, so I've made some adjustments. Now, you notice as I make adjustments, I just push a little harder with my pencil or my charcoal. I make those areas a little darker. All right, so you do that. You kind of go through and you check all those relationships. Then, now we're on to our final stage of this. This is refinement. So I'm not going to erase anything. I'm going to just go back and kind of correct the drawing, but push a little harder. And I'm going to make my ellipses nice. I'm going to do all those systems that we did. I moved this, so I'm going to have to change that ellipse to here. And then so now I'm refining. I'm not tracing over the lines. I am redrawing them. Follow through, follow through. So I don't want to just retrace it. So what you don't want to do is just like like we did with the plants. We're not doing it that way. We are just going to draw each line individually. Like that. Okay, so what am I missing? There's this line that's there. Okay. And as a final, always final thing, you want to step back and look at every decision you made and all the placement of everything. Notice that it's rough, like some of the marks that I made right at the beginning are still there. Corrections I've made. I mean, I just kind of, you know, just draw darker next to them. Let the old stuff stay. It doesn't matter. I don't want you to erase if you can avoid it, and just kind of lay it out like this. Okay. Now, there's a lot that goes on. It's a very simple still life, but there's everything that you do in your drawing, you've done when you've drawn this. You're doing a lot of observation, comparing. You're sensitive to positive and negative shapes. You're thinking about how this, every point you make, every line you make, how it relates to something. And on top of all that, you're remembering your skills. How do you draw an ellipse? How do you draw? How do you measure? How do you figure out an angle? Like, so bring all of that into this drawing.